nutrition. Everybody has their idea. Everybody has their unbeatable diet, but one shoe doesn't fit all.
No.
So I think we're going to look at that today. Perhaps give you some ideas of what can and can't work. In general, I think it's a fair call to say that there are some fundamental rules.
Overall, I'd say, yeah, absolutely. There's some fundamentals that are just have always been and will always be.
One thing I did when I was bringing my children up, and raising children is a challenge, especially with food, because of all the influences. You look at TV and you look at all the influences they have around them. One thing I remember from when I was in Japan, this is what blew my mind about school in Japan. In Japan, the schools provide lunch. Now, when I was a little boy, every school child in Australia, perhaps, I know at least in Queensland, would get a third of a pint of milk free every day. In Japan, the schools actually provide the most incredibly well-balanced, varied lunch for their kids, you know. And so the kids in Japan are brought up with a really solid idea of what tastes good and the flavors that are useful and helpful. Their taste buds aren't blown out by sugar and processed food
and chemical manipulation.
That's right.
Yeah.
When I was bringing my kids up, you want to bring them up with a really solid diet. But one thing that I did, which I felt was pretty important in the long run, was I actually used to deliberately take my kids to McDonald's once a month. But it was just a matter of time before the kids went, no, we don't really want to go. We you know, whereas if you restrict them and don't say, no, we're not going to McDonald's, they'll want to go to McDonald's.
What they don't have, they want, or what they can't have, yeah.
But by taking them to McDonald's and by showing them that they have this choice of food which, compared to the flavors and healthy food that I was doing my best to give them at home, wasn't a good cook by any means, but they got nutritious food. And I would give them, you know, ice cream every now and then or something like that, so that hopefully they'd forget how bad my cooking was. But by taking them to McDonald's once a month, it was just literally a very short period of time before they said, well, we don't want to go to McDonald's. So there you go. What's a healthy meal? What's a healthy meal, Mitch? What did you have for breakfast?
Well, I'm one of those people that doesn't eat breakfast. I break my fast around lunchtime every day. So it's between 11 and 2 p.m, depending on what I've got on the day, client coaching wise. And what I have every day is the same. It's usually a punnet of berries, another piece of fruit. Then it'll be usually 6 eggs with lots of vegetables, all scrambled up. And that's my simple. I'm a creature of habit, so I'm very easy to please.
Well, there you go. There's one dietary rule that I think is highly underestimated: eating the same nutritional food over and over. I believe in that. I believe in that a lot. There's always opportunities to vary your diet.
Yeah.
But in terms of what your body needs, I mean, you don't vary your other habits too much. You don't sleep on your head one day, then sleep on your feet the next. We're creatures of habit. Mm-hmm. And I tend to believe, it's just me, that eating the same nutritious food every day is a good start for breakfast.
Look, I think so too, because it also comes down to trial and error and what works for you. And I think you'll talk about that a little bit more. But you've got to figure out what works for you. And I've tried so many different things over the years. And at this point in my life, with the things I have going on, that suits me really well. I feel fantastic doing it. And no complaints. And I enjoy it. And that's very important.
You know, there's two sayings, two dietary principles that come to mind. First is Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda's ideal diet. He said the best diet is any diet that suits your constitution. And when you think in terms of that, and you look at, for example, a comparison, you mentioned a book earlier where they compared the dietary intake of Inuit, Eskimos, Maasai tribesmen, who else was it?
Indigenous Australian, Aborigines, Maori culture, and a whole bunch of different other cultures through Europe and so on. That book's called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by the authors West and Price. I believe he's a dentist that went around the world and looked at the nutritional habits of all different cultures, and he came to some certain conclusions: nutrition and physical degeneration.
Yeah.
By Weston A. Price.
I've actually looked at that book. He also looked at the way it affects the mouth shape
Yeah,
and the teeth.
That was one of the ways he assessed health. And he concluded that So the Inuits, I think the Eskimos, is that right? Who eat a lot of whale blubber, so high protein, high fat. And you compare that to, say, the indigenous Aborigines here in Australia that have berries and fruit and a higher carbohydrate diet. What he found was the macronutrient intake was secondary compared to the introduction of sugar, refined sugar, white flour, and processing foods. And when the offspring of these people were introduced those I wouldn't call it nutrition, but those things into their food, the degeneration started happening significantly in the teeth, clubfoot, postural breakdowns, and so on. It was quite significant. He's got some great photos in that book as well.
Coincidentally, I was talking to a dentist this morning, and I was talking about breathing and the difference between mouth breathing and nose breathing, and so on. And she mentioned that there's a lot of research being done in the dental world, and they show that mouth breathing, for one, it's terrible for decay of teeth, but also the way it affects the air passage and the shape
of the face,
the shape of the face from a dental viewpoint as well. I've tried various diets at different times through my career when I had to drop weight, and they've all been successful, but they aren't necessarily sustainable. There was one diet which we worked on for a long time called the Zone diet that goes back probably 25 years now.
Barry Sears,
the Zone diet really hit it off well with a lot of people and was very successful. And fundamentally, it's sustainable. 40% protein, 30% high quality carbs, and 30% good quality fat. All those sort of things. Right now, the diet that I follow is a little bit different to that. It doesn't necessarily say you have to have 40-30-30. It just says that there are certain things you need to avoid for most of the time, namely refined foods, high sugar, lots of carbs in your drinks, so Coca-Cola, sugar drinks, those sort of things. And I think when I said the Yogananda's dietary suggestion is the best diet is any diet that suits your own constitution, another very commonly known saying is one man's meat is another man's poison. And there you go. If we all tried to survive on an Inuit's diet, we wouldn't last long. If we all tried to survive on the diet of a Maasai tribesman or a Central Plains Aborigine, we wouldn't last long.
I think there'd be mass weight loss in the West.
Yeah, exactly.
They'd reject it.
And I have to say, I love America, I love USA, but in terms of, and whilst they've brought a lot of medical mastery and medical science to the world, their general diet is about as bad as it gets. And in terms of a combination of a whole bunch of things, especially diet, they don't even rank in the top 30 or 40 countries in the world. Australia's doing a little bit better, but not much better.
Not much. Unfortunately, we follow America in that way. And the American diet is called the SAD, Standard American Diet, which is SAD, S-A-D. I think it's Standard American is SAD. I think it's, exactly.
Now, when Mitch was an Utideshi, but also when I had my live-in students, I spent a lot of time trying to work out ways to optimize training output. Do you eat before? Do you eat after? When you eat after? How long have you got to eat? That door closes very quickly, and you have to make sure that you're supplying the body with certain types of nutrients. Nutrition. One book that I drew on, which I actually went and met this gentleman, had a good chat to him. This is a book called Food of the Gods by Dr. Henry Osiecki. Now, this book, I have to say, when did I get it? It's pretty old. 1989. Notice I cover my books. I've had this book since 1989. But that's about right, isn't it? Because that's when I started the Utideshi program about then. This has some fantastic guidance in it. And I used a lot of this book's content, particularly about the things not to do and some great ideas. Do you recall this book?
Yes, I do. And I recently saw that you had it about a year ago again, and I borrowed it off you. Probably don't remember, and I reread it because it's just it was so forward at its time, so ahead of its time. Yeah,
it's a fantastic book. This one, you have your macronutrients, you have your trace elements, you have your micronutrients. Macronutrients being the carbs, the proteins, and the fats. And even within those, you have different levels. You have high glycemic carbs, low glycemic carbs. You have
complete and incomplete proteins.
Yes, complete and incomplete
different
proteins.
Fats.
The difference between complete and incomplete is certain proteins aren't enough for the body, so we have to supplement them with other forms of amino acids or proteins. You have low density lipoprotein fats, you have high density, some fats are good, some fats are bad. All this sort of stuff you need to really spend some time studying. And sometimes, if you have half a brain and you've spent time looking into it because of your training, you have a pretty solid idea. And then sometimes you'll meet someone and you'll be talking to them about diet. I remember one guy, and this guy was half serious, tongue in cheek, but half serious. His perfect diet was meat pies and Coca-Cola. And he said, it's good. The meat pie is full of protein and fat, carbs. And he said, and the pastry of the meat pie coats your stomach. You drink the coat and it takes the coating off. So you're in this perfect state of equilibrium. This is some people's dietary ideas.
Yeah. And some people get away with that for periods of time because of genetics and just what they bring to the world physiologically. And it's not something I recommend to anyone ever, but hey, each to their own.
Well, if you have your own dietary ideas and principles, please note them down, make a comment below. If you haven't subscribed, do so. I don't know why you haven't. The last 100 people who subscribed all got a free Tesla. So you dipped out on that, but you never know what's coming up.
For the next 100.
Yeah. So quickly subscribe. Look, the other thing that I like to think about too is what I call nanonutrients. So I think you've got micronutrients, macronutrients, and nanonutrients. And nanonutrients, that's just a word that I kind of made up because I was looking for a word to describe it. Nanonutrients to me are the nutrients which have no nutrition but are vitally important to your health. And that's mainly fresh air, good pure water, and good sunshine. And those three things, none of them, except for sunshine with vitamin D, but none of them directly provide calories. But gosh, they're important. Eh?
Very important. Yeah, they change mood. They do have such large impacts on the body. It's quite incredible. And just on water alone, clean water is so important for our health. It's so important. The body's mainly water. We've all heard stats on that before. But also the amount of people that actually walk around largely dehydrated, I think is a lot more significant than people realize. And the benefit of increasing our water intake has so many potential upsides compared to downsides. It's crazy. And I think it's one of the best investments people can make in their health is to actually just drink more water.
And people have a very strange idea of what it means to be hydrated. Someone will tell you they drink 1.25 liters of Coke every day. And that's where they get their hydration.
Yeah. Or they have X amount of coffees, or they're drinking, energy drinks and things like that. Yeah. Are not helpful to the body. No. The other thing that when it comes to nutrition as well, is
good on you, guys.
We get so many. Well, you were talking about the influences early, especially when you're raising your kids. There is so much influence, and we've all been exposed to it. You can't get away from it. And there's so much debate around macronutrient profiles. Like we mentioned 40-30-30, the Dr. Barry Sears' own diet.
Keto diet.
Yeah, the keto, Dr. Atkins diet, the Californian beach diet.
The Dr. Atkins diet, which basically was pretty well all protein, just pure protein. And the idea is it puts your body in a state of ketosis.
Yes.
Which drops away the unnecessary fat. It was very successful. I used it for my first ever tournament in 1978. Had dropped from 85 Ks to 75 Ks. Mm-hmm. And it was very successful. But it's completely unsustainable.
Yeah.
It's not realistic.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
Actually, just on that, I remember the Blonde Bomber. Anyone that's a little bit older might remember Dave Draper. He's an American bodybuilder. And I remember him in one of his books years ago saying the way to get lean really quickly is just to eat tuna for 3 days and water. Tuna and water, and that's it. And now you look a certain way, and people hear that, but that's a bodybuilder that just has to look on stage a certain way. And
he's already at 4%.
Yeah. He's doing other things, and also only has to look a certain way for a few minutes, and that's it. There's nothing actually involving decision-making, work capacity, skills, technique, all the things that we do
and
in
the
martial
hormonal
arts.
response to food, especially when it's timed in relation to your training. So you can eat certain things and get away with it after you've done a very intense strength workout, because your body needs that nutrition in a different way. On the other hand, if you had the same diet, first thing in the morning when you wake up after being asleep all night, it's not going to be the best thing in the world. I think that's pretty important.
Yeah,
too.
it's definitely important. And the other thing that I think it's valuable for people to take away from something like this is where we get our food from, and eating seasonally, I think, is just so important. And it just doesn't get the airtime. And that's why I'm sort of, promoting that sort of topic now, because getting locally grown food where it's not transported from too far, it hasn't been frozen and then
snap frozen for a year.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it's on the shelf and there it is. Like, that's a huge thing. And then eating seasonally as well. Ideally, the fruits and vegetables that we take, depending where you are in the world and how climatic the world is, they should vary throughout the year. There's times of year that it's good that you can't get, like I love passion fruit. You can't get passion fruit, right? There's times of year you can't, mangoes and watermelon, I love these things, but there's times of year you just don't really get them. We should ideally eat seasonally.
And if you shop at a local farmer's market,
yes,
you naturally are eating seasonally, because they will provide what is available for that season.
Yeah, and they're growing it fairly locally because they're driving there. And I think eating there is good too. But shopping at farmers markets for food, I think, is just a really, really important thing we can do. And if you just do things
not to mention the social experience of getting out and meeting people,
supporting local businesses, all these kinds of things.
I think another thing that people need to really ask themselves is, what are they eating for? Are you an athlete who's preparing for a tournament and you have to eat appropriately for the intensity of your training?
Yes.
Am I trying to put weight on? Am I trying to put weight off? Am I carrying 25 to 35% body fat? Would you say that that's not uncommon?
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. Yeah.
Pardon the pun. But there are a lot of people who carry far too much weight, and they know it, but they don't feel, and I feel for them, they don't feel as though there's anything they can do. I remember once, won't mention his name, good Kyrgyzstan friend of mine said, I'm just having trouble. I'm trying to lose weight, just can't lose weight. I said, are you watching? Yeah, I'm eating well. My wife cooks beautiful dinners. I said, well, here's what we can do is for the next 10 days, just have a notebook with you and write down everything that goes in your mouth. Just put it. And in 2 days, he rang me back and I said, I think I found the problem. And without even being aware of it, whilst he was at work every day doing his work, he was having, I think, 4 Mars bars and about 10 cans of Coke. Wow. So he was having 4 chocolate bars and 10 cans of Coke a day that weren't in his brain as part of his nutritional intake, because his nutritional intake in his head was what he had for breakfast, what he had for lunch, and what he had for dinner. But it was the invasion of these incredibly high sugar snacks in between the meals that were also contributing that he overlooked. And I think that's one really important thing, is there are certain things that we can do which just take a little bit of discipline, but you just have to be aware of it first. And for him, all he needed to do was cut out the Coke and chocolate bars just for a start.
But I think even more important than that, Shian, is the fact that you write it down. Something that Ian King taught me, 20 years ago, is that you need to write down. If you want to assess anything, what gets measured gets managed, basically. So write down every single thing that goes in your mouth nutritionally for 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 or up to a month days is so important, because then you know what you're actually working with something. You're not just, there's a good saying, the shortest pencil is better than the longest memory. And it's so important when it comes to nutrition, because I was actually dinner with friends a couple of weeks ago, and one of my friend's wives, were having dessert after dinner, and she was entering in her app, because you get apps now that record your food intake. No word of a lie, she didn't enter her dessert. I was sitting next to her, and I said, didn't you have some of this? Isn't this going to... She's like, I was going to put that in. I said, then what's the point of doing it? Yeah. People play these games with themselves, and they don't serve you. So write it down. If you want to start looking at nutrition, is to write it down. I can't stress that enough.
Look, the science of the human physiology is arguable. There are certain things about the length of our intestines being a multiple of the length between where it goes in and where it comes out. Compare that, the canines, the teeth, the shape of our mouth. Carnivores love the scent and smell of blood and flesh. But humans, as a general rule, will love to see a variety of colors and beautiful scents and things like this. And so we're attracted. You put out a table of fruit and vegetables like the famous picture of the Horn of Plenty and the cornucopia of the wide array of foods that we are attracted to naturally, is very different to that of a carnivore who lives on raw meat and blood, and that sort of thing. The sensory stimulus that we get from food is also a really interesting way to view your own dietary. What really gets you're going with diet. Some people love pasta, other people love fruit smoothies, and the variety of colors and things. And I think that's really important.
It's another tool that I use personally with people. Is I don't recommend anything, but I suggest getting more colors on your plate when people eat. Try and figure out a way to get 2 or 3 or 4 extra colors on your plate, and I think that's just a great way to broaden the micronutrient intake we get, the variety of food, and so on. It's really critical.
And another thing is, don't become like a reformed smoker going around telling smokers how bad they are. If you're a vegetarian, great. If you're a vegan, great. If it rocks your boat and keeps you healthy, great. But don't try and force your dietary opinion on other people. I haven't eaten red meat since I was 19, so 45 years nearly. But I never ever tell anybody that they shouldn't. In fact, when my kids were growing up, I would cook my children a steak every now and then, or lamb chops every now and then, or sausages every now and then, just so they had the experience of a wide range of food, so they could make up their mind.
It sounds like you'd be good in Fight Club. First rule of Fight Club: do not talk about Fight Club.
There you go. First rule of the kitchen: don't try and force your vegetarian ideas upon people. Yogananda said an interesting point. Of course, Yogananda, as a yoga teacher, he chose to be a vegetarian. But he also said that there's nothing worse for a vegetarian to say, go to someone's house as a guest, and you turn up and they've cooked spaghetti bolognese, and you go, I'm sorry, I can't eat that, I'm a vegetarian. He said, just zip the lip, eat it, and let the body sort it out. Because the more emotion you attach to that, the more you do more damage to your body with the emotional charge and the chemicals you're driving through the body than if you just ate it and forgot it and let the body sort it out. And I think that's really solid advice. Don't argue with people about diet.
I think that's absolute wisdom. And we live in a world now of such tribalism. People are just attached to different tribes with a lot of different things, as we know. And I think being at the extremes of any tribe is not good short-term or long-term. It's not sustainable. It's not something that's got longevity in it, and you won't end up with too many friends. And friends are those great people that know everything about you and still like you. So we've got to value them. But you can also have great conversations with them when we're not so extreme with our points of view.
It's really important to recognise that whilst we may have had dietary recommendations 50 years ago, those dietary recommendations may not be applicable today, especially when you're talking about the non-local sourcing of food, where the mass production of food. Tomatoes, from what I understand, the average tomato you buy in a supermarket has about 25% of the vitamin C that they had 30, 40 years ago.
And also when it comes to things like the food pyramid and so on, I did a talk many years ago and I got the food pyramids, I think from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, or as far back as I went. And it was really interesting to see how they've changed over time. But what was also interesting was see the financial influences on the food pyramid as well. And I think that you've got to look at that too, because there are a lot of incentives in a lot of aspects of our lives that you want to ensure that you're getting non-biased information on these things. And one of the greatest things we can do, and this is an Ian King saying, I say all the time, come to your own conclusions based on your own experiences with nutrition. Because Xian could eat something, I could eat something, and he may feel fantastic and I may not feel so good. And that's not just to do with the food. Maybe it's what I did yesterday or what I did last night. it's not so simple. So these things take a while to iron out, to figure out what works great for us. It's not just done in 2 or 3 days. It's a process like training, like learning Kihon, learning Ido Kihon, learning Kumite, not to panic under pressure, all those things that you teach so well.
Let the body worry about it. If your diet gets screwed up for a day, like they used to say in the zone, you're only ever 1 meal away from the zone.
Yep.
You know, and it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's good advice. Don't get so caught up in stuff that your emotional attachment to it affects the physiological response to what's going on.
Such wisdom. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's kind of a little bit like the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, do what is going to be in your highest and best good. But those 20% or 10% of the times, whatever it is, like you said, enjoy. Yeah. Life's to be enjoyed.
Yep. 100%. You know, you're not here for
No, just 10%.
Well, 7.5%. I can't believe you exaggerated all the way to 10%. Supplementation is really important for some people, particularly when you're training extra hard and you're not providing your body with the proper nutrition. Supplements will take the edge off that. I think it's very valuable. Having said that, there's good supplements and bad supplements. I've seen people take supplements which you may as well be eating cardboard, and so you have to do your homework. I narrowed supplements down to what works best for you, but in terms of sourcing it, I found a couple of really solid companies, both which happen to be multi-level marketing companies. There's nothing wrong with that. Direct marketing companies just choose to market their products in a certain way. But the two companies, one of them USANA, and the other one was Melaleuca, one supplement which Tammy Van Wees, who was the only person in the history of the world to swim non-stop from Victoria to Tasmania.
Bass Strait.
Yeah. And she swam that, and the water temperature was an average of, I think, 7 degrees. And she said by the time she finished it, all she could feel was about 1 inch around her heart.
Wow.
The rest of her body was completely numb, had no feedback. And she used one particular supplement which allowed her body to convert stored fat into energy the way the body would normally convert glycogen into energy. That's the sort of thing you can get into. And Henry Osiecki talks about that in many ways, using medium chain triglycerides at the right time, in the right levels, and things like that. This whole nutrition thing, you just have to be a little careful about how you discuss it and who you discuss it with. But we can tell you that you have to be conscious of your diet. You can't just eat anything. Sadhguru, he said something really cool. He said that you can eat anything you want. Just be aware of the fact that what you eat is going to be part of your body within 24 hours. So when you look at something and you want to eat it, ask yourself, do you want that to be part of your body?
Is that saying you are what you eat?
You are what you eat, yes. You are what you think, you are what you eat. You want to knock yourself out, have a bit of fun every now and then, have an ice cream, you know. And I think if you have toasted Vegemite and cheese and honey and peanut butter every day of your life, all of a sudden you're going to be finding that your body's storing.
Yeah, and a question for you on that. Do you find as you get older, and you still train a lot, for those that don't know, Xian trains a lot, you could train this morning, like you just finished a session before this Zoom, you'll probably do another one tonight. So very frequently, if you were to eat poorly, for lack of a better description, what would that do to your training performance?
Here's the interesting thing. When you tune into it, you notice it immediately. If I don't eat well, and if I don't hydrate well, I can feel it in the repetition of exactly the same thing I did the day before, and I'm finding that my body is responding in a different way. So I think that's really important to ask yourself all the time, well, what's my diet for? If you're not training, that's the problem. When people don't train, you can eat and get away with it because you're not actually conscious of the physiological response to
the effect of the food that you're eating on you. Yeah.
So anyway, if you've got any questions or comments, please put them down. Gaz, I like your comment there. Gustav, Namaste. Mike, Lele Kanazal Sensei told me something. Yeah, I mean that whole idea, the best diet is any diet that suits your own constitution. And don't get so caught up in diet that you allow the emotions to rule. You go to someone's house, they cook you a nice meal, for crying out loud, eat it, appreciate it, and be grateful. let the body sort it out. It's like training. You walk into a dojo sometimes and they do the kata in a different way. And if you have no right to speak up, then don't speak up. Just go, oh, us. You know, when you're in Rome, you do what the Romans do. In Japan, they say, go ni iru to go ni shitagai. When you're in when you're in someone's home, you do what they do. Okay? So in training, it's 100% the same. You can learn so much. You get locked into why we'll go block up, punch, instead of block, leave it down, punch. Okay? If you're smart, you'll do both and you'll realize that they both have value. So by going into someone else's dojo and doing it their way, zip your lip, you actually might learn something. Doesn't matter. You know, I train with people all the time, and some of the most insightful things I've seen are people who aren't preconditioned. They might be a white belt and they go, why don't you do it like that? And you go, oh, because da-da-da. But you walk away going, actually, that's a really good point. Why do we do it like that? You know, well, diet is the same. You see fat kids with fat parents. It's got nothing to do with genetics. The genetic propensity will be that genetics provides the body with a certain cellular makeup. But what you do with that cellular makeup is purely habit.
Yeah, and there's a emerging field of science called epigenetics, and that's the influence that we have on our genes, and they are malleable. They are absolutely malleable through, and without opening another can of worms, nutrition is essentially information for gene expression. So when you look at it that way, the nutrition that we take in simply provides information on our genes on how to express themselves. They can express themselves positively or otherwise. Depends on the food we take in, the exercise we do, the mindset we have, the environment we're in, and blah, blah, blah. So that's a fascinating field that I enjoy looking into, and it has opportunities for all of us.
Yes, very important. And another thing which I found very important is that at my age, I'm 64 this year, I have the benefit of hindsight, and I can run into friends who are the same age, and their genetic expression of their habits is unmistakable. You can see what they've done to their body for the last 50 years. You may know them from when you're a 15-year-old kid. When you're 15, the body, you can eat cardboard and get away with it. You know, you can train like nuts and get away with it. But then you see that their epigenetic propensities or their epigenetic habits, their habits of diet, their habits of lifestyle catch up with them at 64. And sometimes you can see people who are 64, 65. I met a gentleman the other day on the airplane coming back from Singapore, and I was talking to him, and I literally felt that he was about my age. And I started to talk to him, and he started to, I said, well, where are you? You've got a really interesting accent. He says, well, I moved to Australia when I was 11, and that was in, I think he said, I said, where did you move from? He said, we moved from England. He said, when I was a little kid, we were getting bombed by the bombs in World War II. Wow. The guy was 80 years old, and he literally looked 60, and he looked like a youthful 60. So I asked him, what did you do? He says, well, I just don't particularly follow any rules. I just try to be happy, try to be kind to people, and don't eat too much.
There you go.
He just said, don't eat too much.
It can be that simple.
Yeah.
You got a question here.
What should be the diet for tournament training? Well, again, what is your current diet? What do you allow yourself? Do you have any rules that you'll absolutely stick by regardless of what you're told? Someone says this, this, and this, you go, yeah, but I don't eat that, I don't eat that, I don't eat that. Well, so the most important diet is a diet that suits your own constitution, which provides you with the nutrition foundation that you need to continue training without injury. I think that's very important. It's just like training. Training is not just the training, it's the compensation, it's the rest,
the recovery,
the recovery that you allow the body. Okay, well, diet is the same. If you're training hard for a diet, you have to make sure you're getting plenty of good water, plenty of good healthy food, as much as you need, but not too much. Physiology. Look, it's a tricky question, because I can tell you now, you take 1,000 tournament fighters over the last, and you ask them what their diet was, and you'll have 1,000 different diets. But what's important is that you do your own research and you create a diet based on what you think will fit you. Okay? But there are certain rules, you need to eat well, you need to eat regularly, and you need to give your body an opportunity to heal after every training session.
And that's a large purpose of nutrition, especially as people get older, but for tournament fighters and competitive athletes, is to eat to heal the body. I mean, some of the foods we take in are actually inflammatory, and training is an inflammatory stress on the body. So we want to take in nutrition and nutrients that minimize that inflammation a lot of the time to help us recover, to help our joints recover, our joint linings, our connective tissues, all that kind of thing. So it's a big wide world out there, but doing the fundamentals like Xian and we talked about earlier, eating locally, eating seasonally, a lot of colors on the plate, essentially figuring out what feels good for you, good water supply, that kind of thing. Just those fundamentals are so important. And nutrition's one of those things as well, Sharon. I think it's so many people, too many people know, but don't do enough. And I sort of get less interested in what people know and more interested in just what are you doing and what's working for you and what's not.
Yeah, that's true. Get well soon, Mike. Sorry to hear that, but I think the more people get COVID and recover from it, the better the world's going to be.
Yeah.
We're in an endemic, so that's a good thing. But yeah, it's so true. And that's when you notice it, when you're very sick, all of a sudden you start to question your diet. You should question your diet before you get sick. COVID's different, of course. But a lot of people are constantly ill and they just think it's just bad luck.
It's not. Usually it's not.
Yeah. Anyway, look, I hope that was enjoyable. I hope you got something from that. Well, there you go. Daniel wants to know some examples of inflammatory food.
So alcohol, inflammatory, sugars, lollies, those types of things.
High glycemic sugars.
Yeah, Coca-Cola. If you eat KFC, there's a classic video I saw years ago. I don't know where I saw it online, but basically a scientist went in and he went to a fast food place and he ate, burger, fries and a soft drink. And he took blood an hour after it and spun it and had a look at the plasma and basically the content of the blood. The next week he went in and he went somewhere where he had a healthy salad, chicken burger, whatever it was, water, and did the same thing. And you look at the difference in the blood, the cloudiness of the blood with the fast food, and then the clearness of the blood with the healthy food, and just things like that. The blood plasma, it was spun in a centrifuge, make a significant difference. So hopefully that's helpful. Just everyone knows it. This junk food and poor eating habits are inflammatory. And what's generally, without going into
sparkling drinks like Coke and lemonade, high sugar drinks, any of that stuff is very inflammatory.
And without going into different people's, what do you call it when someone's a celiac or dietary, they have different conditions. With excluding them, generally, fruits and vegetables in good sources are generally anti-inflammatory. They help the body heal and recover and do things well, as a broad general rule. I'll get some pushback on that, I know, but as a broad rule, you're not going to go wrong doing that.
Of course, there are some people who, for one reason or other, they're born with certain conditions.
So kale might make some people sick, but they're exceptions in the rule.
Yeah, but the reality is a lot of people with a lot of these, I know the word you're after, I just can't remember it.
Yeah.
A lot of these allergies.
Yes, food allergies, that was one.
A lot of these allergies are actually developed by poor diet when they're children. Okay? So, especially if you're raising children, well, you have to be conscious. Are you educating them well in terms of their diet later on in life? What do you think of the long-term effects of dramatically dropping weight over a short period, over a short or long period of time? Well, I mean, certain sports require dramatic weight loss. It's not something you're going to be doing for life. But if you, and I'm not saying you do, Marco, but if someone thinks that the right way to live long term is to allow themselves to get fat and then drop weight very quickly, it's just not natural. The best thing is to, and I know that's not what you're asking, but the best thing is to find a very healthy, natural level and discipline yourself to maintain that level. In terms of dropping weight for tournaments and so on, sometimes you've got to do it, I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just when it becomes a chronic habit in that guys don't allow themselves to fight at the next division. A good tournament career may last 10 to 12 years. Well, that should be and within those 10 to 12 years, you might be frantically dropping weight once or twice a year. Well, that's not going to hurt you too much, I don't think. But if you feel as though It's something, if for example, you're on a certain competition circuit and you have to drop weight like that every second week, it's insane.
Yeah, competing dehydrated, and most people will do it through water weight as well. So competing dehydrated, especially in contact activity, is probably not the greatest thing for the brain and body long term.
That dehydration. So many athletes have died as a result of the problem is not the diet and dropping weight. The problem is the dehydration that they're using to drop those last few grams. Okay, so sometimes you've got to do it. If you're fighting at certain weight division, you're competing in a sport that requires you to not go over a certain weight, that's life. You've got to deal with it. Just be very careful. And what I used to do with the fighters, you may remember, if they had to drop weight, it wasn't something we did in the last week. Like it
was done out.
One fighter, Gary, he needed to put on weight. So rather than put on a lot of weight and go from there, we worked on the idea of increasing weight. I think we said something like 200 grams a month over the next year, because you've got the neurological effect of excessive weight too. How does that affect your technique? You've got to remember that if you wonder how putting excess weight on affects your technique, go out and throw a few kicks and punches with 1 kilo weights on your wrist and see if it makes a difference. It does. Don't go out and do that. I don't think it's good. But you get the idea. You have to allow the nerves to catch up with the body weight, and it's the nerves that move the muscles. So unless you do that very carefully, then putting on that extra weight or taking off that extra weight can make a big difference.
Yeah, do it slowly over time. If skill, timing, accuracy, distance, which we need in Kyokushin and martial arts, is something, the longer period of time you do that in, the better off you're going to be, generally speaking.
But in terms of the long-term effects of dropping weight over a short period of time, as long as you don't do it too often and as long as that weight isn't too much, I don't think there's a problem at all. You just got to manage it very well and don't do it all the time, and don't treat it as normal. It's not normal. It's part of a protocol that you have to follow for a short period of a competitive life, and a short competitive life are full of not normal things.
Yeah.
So anyway, folks, thank you very much. Always good to have Mitch.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Hope you got something out of that, a little bit about nutrition. We talked about it in the Budo Blueprint group recently, but I just wanted to talk about it in the general public as well. So please leave a comment. Let me know what your ideas are. And Rochelle, you didn't say anything, but Rochelle knows an awful lot about the body's effect.
There was some great chat in the Budo Blueprint group about it, some fantastic insights.
If you're a member of Budo Blueprint, get in there and have a look at some of those Zooms, particularly Rochelle's comments about diet. Very interesting. Thanks, guys. Good on you. See you next week.